The son of Lisa Marie Presley and grandson of Elvis Presley sadly passing away over the weekend. Benjamin Keno died from a self-inflicted gunshot wounds yesterday.
The Presley family's story has always been full of fame, fortune, and heartbreak. But with Benjamin Keough's sudden tragic death, some wonder, is there a dark family curse haunting the Presleys? Or is there something else, some hidden force, that keeps leading them to tragedy? The Presley legacy. Think of being born into a world where your last name is almost a brand. You're not just Benjamin or Ben to people. You're Elvis Presley's grandson. Elvis, the king himself. His fame was a legacy passing through generations, changing music and movies, and practically making history. But while the world saw a rock and roll icon, his family saw him as something else entirely: Dad and Grandpa. Benjamin Keough was born in 1992 to Lisa Marie Presley, Elvis's only child. And this Presley name meant he was already under the spotlight from day one. Growing up as a Presley was a double-edged sword. On one side, there were obvious perks. Benjamin grew up in a home filled with music, stories, and huge memories of a man he never met but whose legacy was deeply etched into his life. His mom, Lisa Marie, often spoke of her father, Elvis, telling stories that gave Ben a sense of the man behind the legend. They were close, Lisa Marie and Benjamin, and she often said he was the love of her life. Think about that bond, a mother who saw her father's spirit in her son's eyes. Now, Ben had a lot going for him. He was a private kid despite his fame. Friends say he had a great sense of humor and loved playing the guitar. In fact, he was musically gifted, taking to instruments almost naturally. It was like he had a piece of Elvis's talent flowing through him. But being a Presley meant living under a shadow that could be stifling. People wanted him to be like his granddad and step into that role, even if he hadn't asked. The Presley dynasty's unusual family dynamic also impacted Benjamin's life. On the one hand, there was the glamour, growing up with people idolizing the man who made Hound Dog and Jailhouse Rock immortal. But on the other hand, there was a deep struggle. Elvis's fame didn't always come with happiness, and his life ended tragically at just 42 years old. That shadow loomed large over his family, who bore the pain of a man who gave so much to the world, but perhaps left some emptiness for those closest to him. There's an old saying about families with legacies like the Presleys, that it's both a blessing and a curse. And in Ben's case, it was probably a bit of both. Looking in the mirror, he saw a face strikingly similar to Elvis's. Imagine having the face of someone so recognizable that even strangers stopped to stare, amazed by the resemblance. But what if every time you looked at yourself, you saw a legend you weren't sure you wanted to live up to? Being told you look like Elvis Presley might be cool, but it probably felt like he was walking in shoes too big to fill for Ben. His early years were also peppered with expectations. People constantly asked if he'd sing or pick up a guitar and become the next Elvis. The media didn't help either, stirring up rumors and building narratives around Ben before he could decide who he was. It was not just about being famous, it was about living up to a myth, which is hard to live up to. This clash between his quiet personality and the loud expectations created a unique pressure, and he carried it with him as he grew up. Benjamin may have wanted a more private life, but the world wouldn't let him slip into the background. And yet, despite all that, he tried to pave his own way. He was working on music, exploring his passions, and, like any young adult, trying to find himself. So while the world kept trying to turn him into Elvis 2.0, Ben just wanted to be Ben. This is where his story takes a twist. How do you escape a legacy as powerful as Elvis Presley's? How does someone so young find peace in a life where every resemblance to his famous grandfather is both a compliment and a challenge? The uncanny resemblance to the king. When Elvis Presley passed away in 1977 at just 42, he left the world wanting more of the charm, voice, and moves that defined an era. Elvis was more than a musician. He was an icon, and his legacy didn't just end with him. Fast forward to 2017, when fans gathered at Graceland for a candlelight vigil on the 40th anniversary of his passing. They came to honor the king, but some fans noticed something that awakened them. There, quietly among the crowd, was standing a young man who looked shockingly like Elvis. This wasn't a ghost or a look-alike. It was his grandson, Benjamin Keough. Born in 1992 to Lisa Marie Presley and her then-husband, musician Danny Keough, Benjamin's resemblance to Elvis is, as his mother once said, uncanny. At events, fans couldn't help but stare at him, doing double takes as if Elvis himself had returned. In a 2012 interview, Lisa Marie shared, "He was at the Opry and was the quiet storm behind the stage. Everybody turned around and looked when he was over there. Everybody was grabbing him for a photo because it is just uncanny. Sometimes I am overwhelmed when I look at him. With his blue eyes, familiar pout, and dark hair, Ben looked like he'd stepped straight out of a time machine from Elvis's prime." For Benjamin, this resemblance was both a blessing and a burden. Imagine everywhere you go, people doing a double take and whispering, "He looks just like Elvis." It's the kind of pressure most of us will never experience. In his case, despite fans and friends, even those who barely knew the Presley legacy found the resemblance stunning. Wherever Ben went, people expected him to be more than just himself. They expected him to somehow channel Elvis. Looking like Elvis brought more than just attention. With every photo and every public appearance, people almost wanted him to act like his grandfather. This resemblance fascinated the public, but put a lot of pressure on Ben. Elvis was not only a star, he was a legend. And when you look like a legend, people can have unrealistic expectations. They want you to bring back the spirit of someone loved by millions. A nearly impossible task for anyone, let alone a young man just trying to live his life. There's an old saying about inheriting both the blessings and burdens of your family's legacy. For Ben, that meant carrying around this intense resemblance to a man who changed music forever. It meant navigating life with strangers, asking him to strike a pose or sing a line, and always with a half-joking, half-serious glint in their eyes as if they were waiting for him to break out into jailhouse rock, right there on the spot. As charming as it sounds, you can imagine how it might feel, like you're never fully in control of your own identity. Even Lisa Marie noticed how her son's resemblance brought out both admiration and expectations from others. She would sometimes joke about it, calling him her quiet storm, because, though he didn't often speak up, he could make a room turn silent just by being there. People would approach him, fascinated by the notion that Elvis's spirit might somehow live on in him. Some fans even half expected Ben to pick up a guitar, rock the stage, and bring the king back to life. But Ben wasn't Elvis, and he had no intention of pretending to be. He was a young man with his own dreams, his own music, and his own path. But the world didn't always see it that way. Ben was reminded of how deeply Elvis's legacy had embedded itself in him with every public appearance. His resemblance evoked memories for those who had loved Elvis, making him almost like a living reminder of what was lost when the king died. To the fans, he was a walking piece of nostalgia, but to himself, he was just trying to be Ben. Benjamin's talents and struggles. Benjamin Keough may have looked like Elvis, but he didn't just sit back and rely on those looks. He had his own musical dreams, talents, and ambitions. It's easy to imagine him picking up a guitar as a young kid, experimenting with chords, maybe even sneaking in a few Elvis tunes, but with his own spin. By his early 20s, Ben was already diving into songwriting and performing. Music was in his blood, and it showed. In 2009, he reportedly signed a $5 million record deal with Universal, and it seemed like he was on the brink of creating something entirely his own. But Benjamin's creativity was not limited to music. He was also drawn to acting, showcasing his talent in films like Roddenberry in 2017 and Elvis by the Presleys in 2005. Through acting, he explored other sides of his creativity, carving out his own presence on screen. Still, for Ben, following Elvis's footsteps in any artistic form wasn't easy, and he knew it. People expected him to have the charisma, the voice, and maybe even the style of the king. Some probably wanted him to perform the same songs, to carry on his grandfather's legacy without missing a beat. But Ben was determined to find his own sound, something that was a bit rock and blues, but fully him. And while that record deal made headlines, it didn't lead to an album release, leaving fans curious and maybe even disappointed. Ben's family, especially his mother, Lisa Marie, knew the pressure all too well. Growing up in the Presley family meant constant comparisons, high expectations, and an almost overwhelming need to measure up to an impossible standard. His mom was his biggest supporter, but she even faced the shadow of her father's fame. She understood that living up to Elvis's legacy was like walking a tightrope. It was something she could help him with, but ultimately Ben had to find his way on his own. The music industry is only possible with a famous last name. People were curious about him, but had strong opinions about what he should or shouldn't be. It was as if the world wanted him to be a modern twist on the king. But Ben didn't want to be a replica. He wanted to be original, and that's not easy to balance. And then there was the issue of fame. For Elvis, fame came with unimaginable highs, but also very dark lows. Ben knew his grandfather's story, the glitz, the glamour, and the struggles and personal demons Elvis faced. Fame wasn't always kind to Elvis, and it put pressure on Ben. He was a quiet soul, preferring to stay out of the spotlight when he could. And yet, with his name and his face, fame was almost impossible to escape. Friends of Ben often mentioned that he had an old soul, someone who seemed like he was from another time. He struggled with depression, a battle that he fought silently. People close to him said that he felt like he was always trying to live up to something, to someone he admired but never knew personally. This internal struggle added to the challenges he faced in his career and life. Despite these pressures, Ben didn't give up on music. He kept working on his craft, exploring his sound, and finding ways to make his mark. But the weight of his name, the constant comparison, and the expectations were heavy. Sometimes it's not just about talent or passion, it's about strength, about finding the courage to keep going even when the world is watching and judging every move. So while Ben had the voice, the looks, and the heart for music, he was also carrying an invisible load, a legacy that was both his blessing and his burden. This internal tug-of-war between living up to the past and creating his own future wasn't unique to Ben. It was something his whole family dealt with. But for Ben, it led to struggles he couldn't always face alone. And that leads us into the next part of his story, a chapter marked by heartbreak and a legacy that, tragically, followed him to his last days. Benjamin's tragic death and legacy. The story of Benjamin Keough is one of promise, pressure, and sadly, heartbreak. On July 12, 2020, the world learned of his tragic passing at the age of just 27. Benjamin died by suicide at his family's home in Calabasas, California. For his family, the news was shattering. The Presley family and fans around the world were left in shock. Losing Benjamin felt like the reopening of old wounds for the Presleys. Decades after Elvis's death, it was as if another chapter had closed too soon. His passing brought back memories of Elvis's struggles, the same battles with fame and pressure that had plagued the king. And while Ben may not have reached the heights of fame that his grandfather did, his loss had a profound impact. It was a painful reminder that fame and talent often come with invisible burdens, which can weigh heavily on the people we least expect. For his family, Benjamin's death was a heartbreaking moment that shook them to their core. Lisa Marie was devastated, as were his siblings and close friends. It wasn't just about losing a son, a brother, or a friend. It was about losing a part of their own story, a young life that carried forward the Presley name and spirit. The Presley legacy had lost yet another bright light, and that loss felt almost too heavy to bear. There's no telling what Benjamin might have achieved if he had lived longer. With his musical talents, he could have made a career that brought the Presley name into a new era of music. He had the looks, the voice, and, perhaps most importantly, the drive to carve his own path. It's easy to imagine him building a sound that combined elements of rock, blues, and maybe even modern twists that would have surprised fans. In many ways, he was a symbol of what could have been, a reminder of the talent and creativity that ran through the Presley bloodline. Today, Benjamin is remembered with a mix of admiration and sadness. Fans often reflect on his resemblance to Elvis, his quiet charm, and the potential he had to continue the family's legacy. For many, he is a reminder of how fleeting life can be and how the pressures of fame can impact even those who seem strong on the outside. His legacy is both sorrowful and inspirational. The Presley family curse. There are some strange rumors about the Presley family. If you've ever heard of the Presley family curse, you're not alone. The idea has haunted fans and tabloids alike for years, ever since Elvis's untimely death on August 16, 1977. Elvis, the king of rock and roll, passed away at just 42. Officially, the cause was a heart attack, but rumors have swirled around his death ever since. Some say it was due to his lifestyle, his struggles with fame, or the pressures of being the world's biggest star. Others believe something darker at work was a curse that seemed to affect the Presleys in ways no one could fully explain. Now, you might think a curse sounds like something out of a movie, but the strange tragedies surrounding the Presley family have fed into this idea over the years. It's not just Elvis's death. Other heartaches and moments of loss made fans wonder if there was something more to it all. His mother, Gladys Presley, passed away at just 46, leaving Elvis devastated. The Presley family's lives were marked by both unbelievable fame and personal sorrow, creating a mystique that captured people's imaginations and raised questions about whether this family was destined for more than just fame. Then came Benjamin Keough's tragic death in 2020, and the whispers about a curse grew louder. Ben's passing at just 27, a young age eerily close to Elvis's 42, struck a chord with fans who had already watched the Presley family endure so much loss. Ben's death mirrored some of the struggles Elvis faced: the pressures of fame, the weight of expectation, and perhaps even the inherited demons of depression and isolation. These parallels between their lives added fuel to the theories about a Presley family curse. Even though there was no proof of anything supernatural at work, it was simply another tragedy in a family that seemed to know too much heartbreak. Of course, the idea of a curse has become a bit of a legend itself. People who believe in it point to the uncanny similarities between Elvis's struggles and those his descendants encountered. The curse theory suggests that the Presley family was almost fated to endure tragic losses, as though their fame came with an unavoidable cost. And while we may never truly know the answer, the speculation has only grown as each generation faces battles. For those close to the family, though, the notion of a curse is simply a way for the public to make sense of things that are, in reality, painfully human. Fame brings with it intense pressures, a lifestyle that often leads to isolation, and struggles with mental health that are all too real. To Lisa Marie, losing Benjamin wasn't part of a curse. It was the loss of a beloved son, a young man who had struggled in ways that can be hard to see from the outside. But for fans, the Presley family curse has taken on a life of its own. A story that links Elvis, Benjamin, and all those in between in a way that feels almost fated. We might wonder if the Presley name will ever escape the shadow of such sorrow, or if this tragic pattern will continue to follow future generations. Is it really a curse, or is it just the hard truth of life lived under a merciless spotlight? Do you think Elvis's passing was the most heartbreaking chapter in the Presley story? Or does Benjamin's loss feel even more tragic in its own way? Share your thoughts below. And if you found this story moving, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more on the lives and legacies of celebrities.